Tony Ritchie had been running Tony's Cosmic Diner at the Galactic Transit Hub for 3 years. And in that time, he'd learned that aliens had the worst taste in food imaginable. They preferred nutrition paste, synthetic protein cubes, and what they called optimal molecular fuel over anything that actually tasted good, which was why his restaurant was consistently rated as the worst dining establishment in the galaxy. Tony called Velana, the four-armed Centaurian station manager, as she floated past his empty diner. The Galactic Health Inspector will be conducting his quarterly review tomorrow. Perhaps you should consider serving food that meets basic galactic nutritional standards. Tony looked around his diner checkered floors, red vinyl booths, a grill that had seen better days, and walls covered with photos of Earth food that made aliens recoil in horror. Not a single customer in sight. As usual. Vel, I've been making real food for 3 years. Burgers, pasta, pizza, meatloaf, comfort food that actually has flavor. Just because aliens prefer eating cardboard doesn't mean I'm going to start serving cardboard. Velana's tentacles, rippled with what Tony had learned, indicated diplomatic concern in her species. Tony, your real food violates 17 different galactic dietary regulations. It contains excessive sodium, unregulated spices, and what our food scientists classify as dangerously high flavor compounds. Yeah, that's called seasoning. Makes food taste good instead of like wet paper. Through the diner's windows, Tony watched streams of aliens heading to Optimal Nutrition Station across the concourse, a sterile facility that served scientifically balanced meals that looked like colored paste and tasted like absolutely nothing. Tony, you have been operating at a loss for 36 months. Perhaps it is time to consider serving food that galactic citizens actually want to eat. Tony wiped down his grill with the same pride his grandfather had taken in his restaurant back in Brooklyn. Vel, my family's been cooking for 4 generations. My great-grandfather opened the first Ritchie's in 1952. My grandfather expanded to 3 locations. My dad ran the business for 30 years. I'm not going to be the Ritchie who gives up and starts serving space paste. But Tony, no one eats your food. That's because no one around here knows what good food tastes like. Just then, a small group of aliens entered the diner, a family of Arcturians with their young offspring. Tony recognized them as one of the few species that occasionally ventured into his establishment, usually by accident. The father, Corvin, approached the counter with his typical expression of polite confusion. Human Tony, we require nutritional sustenance for our family unit. Do you have meals that meet Arcturian dietary requirements? Tony smiled, knowing that Arcturians were among the most nutritionally obsessive species in the galaxy. I've got spaghetti and meatballs, made with real tomatoes, fresh herbs, and beef from Earth. It's got protein, carbohydrates, vitamins from the vegetables, and it tastes incredible. Corvin consulted his dietary scanner, which immediately started flashing warning signals. Human Tony, this food contains 347% above recommended sodium levels, unregulated flavor compounds, and what our health standards classify as excessive taste stimulation. That's what makes it good, Corvin. Trust me. The Arcturian family exchanged glances in what Tony recognized as the alien equivalent of, should we risk it? After a moment of hesitation, Corvin nodded. We will experiment with your spaghetti and meatballs. 20 minutes later, Tony watched the Arcturian family eating their first real meal with expressions that shifted from cautious suspicion to growing amazement to what could only be described as culinary revelation. The youngest Arcturian, Zara, looked up at Tony with wide eyes. Human Tony, why does this food make our taste centers experience such intense stimulation? Because it's supposed to taste good, kiddo. Food isn't just fuel. It's supposed to be enjoyable. Corvin put down his fork and stared at his plate. Human Tony, in 47 years of life, I have never experienced nutritional intake that produced emotional responses. This spaghetti and meatballs create sensations that our dietary science does not account for. That's called enjoying your meal, Corvin. Most species used to know how to do that before they decided nutrition-based was more efficient. The next morning, Tony arrived at his diner to find a line of aliens waiting outside, something that had never happened in 3 years of operation. The line included Arcturians, Centaurians, vegans, and several species he didn't recognize. At the front of the line stood Corvin with his family, along with what appeared to be his extended relatives and work colleagues. "Human Tony," Corvin called excitedly, "we have brought additional family units to experience your food that tastes good. We have been unable to stop thinking about yesterday's nutritional intake." Tony unlocked his diner, overwhelmed by the sudden interest in his cooking. "Corvin, you brought your whole family?" "Human Tony, after experiencing your spaghetti and meatballs, we realized that our entire species has been consuming inadequate nutrition for generations. We wish to learn about this concept of food that tastes good. Over the next hour, Tony found himself cooking breakfast for 23 aliens, explaining basic concepts like seasoning, flavor balance, and the idea that food should be enjoyable rather than just functional. "See, this is scrambled eggs," Tony explained to a fascinated Centaurian as he worked the grill. "I add butter for richness, salt and pepper for flavor, and a little cheese because it tastes amazing. Your nutrition paste might have the same protein content, but it doesn't have the flavor complexity that makes eating a pleasure." Dr. Nova Starweaver, the station's head nutritionist, watched the proceedings with scientific puzzlement. "Human Tony, your cooking methods are highly irregular. You add ingredients that serve no nutritional purpose, use preparation techniques that are inefficient, and create food that stimulates taste receptors far beyond optimal requirements." "Doc, that's the whole point. Food isn't just about meeting nutritional requirements. It's about the experience of eating something delicious." By noon, Tony had served more meals than he typically served in a week. Aliens were staying to finish their food instead of eating efficiently and leaving. They were asking questions about ingredients and preparation methods. And most surprising of all, they seemed to be enjoying themselves. "Human Tony," said Thomas's, an elderly vegan who had ordered Tony's meatloaf, "this food creates sensations that I have not experienced since youth. It reminds me of memories I had forgotten." "What kind of memories, Thomas's?" "Before our species adopted optimal nutrition protocols, we prepared food with care, shared meals with family, took pleasure in flavors and textures. Your cooking reminds me of food my grandmother made before efficiency replaced tradition." Tony paused in his cooking, realizing that something more significant was happening than just serving good food to hungry aliens. "Thomas's, you mean your species used to cook food like this?" "Most species did, Human Tony, but over centuries, we prioritized nutritional efficiency over culinary pleasure. We forgot that food could be more than fuel. It could be culture, memory, connection." That afternoon, Valana approached Tony with her quarterly business review. But instead of the usual discussion about his failing restaurant, she had entirely different concerns. "Tony, the Galactic Health Inspector will be here tomorrow, and I am concerned about the crowds your establishment is attracting." Tony looked around his packed diner, where aliens were lingering over their meals, talking with family and friends, and demonstrating emotional responses to food that he'd never seen in 3 years of operation. "What's wrong with crowds, Vel? Business is finally good." "Tony, Inspector Nexus Logic is the most rigid nutritional compliance officer in this sector. He views excessive flavor enjoyment as a sign of dietary addiction and emotional responses to food as evidence of nutritional irregularity." "So you're saying he's going to shut me down for making food that tastes good?" "Tony, I am saying that Inspector Logic has shut down restaurants for using spices he considered unnecessarily stimulating and banned chefs for creating food that produced excessive enjoyment responses in customers." Tony looked around his diner, full of aliens discovering that food could be a source of pleasure rather than just sustenance, thinking about his family's 4 generations of cooking tradition. "Val, I can't go back to serving nutrition-based. These people are rediscovering something important about what it means to enjoy food." "But Tony, if Inspector Logic determines that your food is creating unhealthy emotional dependencies, he will not only close your restaurant, he will ban human cooking methods throughout this sector." Inspector Nexus Logic arrived the next morning with an entourage of nutritional compliance officers, food safety analysts, and dietary regulation specialists. He was a tall, thin Arctuvian whose metallic features conveyed absolute dedication to galactic food safety standards. Tony's diner was packed with aliens who had been returning daily to experience what they were calling food that creates happiness. But Inspector Logic regarded the crowded restaurant with expressions of bureaucratic suspicion. "Human Tony Ritchie," Inspector Logic announced, consulting his regulatory tablet. I am conducting a comprehensive evaluation of your establishment's compliance with Galactic Dietary Safety Protocol 447B. Initial observations suggest multiple violations of nutritional efficiency standards. Inspector, I'm just cooking real food. Everything's fresh, properly prepared, and my customers are happy. That is precisely the concern, Human Tony. Excessive customer satisfaction with food consumption indicates potential dietary addiction stimulation. Proper nutrition should be efficient, not emotionally stimulating. Inspector Cold Logic began his evaluation by analyzing Tony's ingredients, immediately registering alarm at the presence of spices, herbs, butter, cheese, and what his scanner identified as dangerously high concentrations of flavor compounds. Human Tony, this ingredient labeled garlic, registers as a Class 3 taste stimulant. Galactic regulations limit taste stimulation to minimal levels to prevent nutritional dependency behaviors. Inspector, garlic just makes food taste better. It's been used in cooking for thousands of years, which explains the primitive nature of human dietary habits. Advanced civilizations recognize that optimal nutrition requires minimal sensory stimulation to prevent compulsive eating behaviors. Tony watched Inspector Cold Logic examine his grill, his seasoning collection, and his preparation methods with growing disapproval. Each discovery, from salt and pepper to olive oil to fresh herbs, was documented as a regulatory violation. Human Tony, your cooking methods demonstrate 17 separate violations of galactic food safety standards. You use ingredients that serve no nutritional purpose, employ preparation techniques that create excessive flavor compounds, and produce food that stimulates emotional responses in consumers. Inspector, my customers are happy. They're rediscovering that food can be enjoyable, not just functional. Happiness derived from food consumption is classified as a dietary disorder. Human Tony, proper nutrition should provide sustenance without creating emotional dependencies or sensory addictions. Just then, Corvin entered the diner with his extended family, now including what appeared to be half his species' local population. They had been coming every day to experience what they called Tony's flavor education. Human Tony, Corvin called. We have brought additional family members to experience your teaching about food pleasure. Our entire community wishes to learn about cooking that creates joy. Inspector Cold Logic observed the crowd of aliens with growing alarm. Human Tony, these consumers are demonstrating classic symptoms of dietary dependency. They return repeatedly for the same food, display emotional responses to consumption, and describe your cooking in terms that suggest addictive behaviors. Inspector, they're not addicted. They're just enjoying good food for the first time in their lives. Enjoyment of food consumption beyond basic nutritional satisfaction is classified as a regulatory violation. Human Tony, I am prepared to issue immediate closure orders for this establishment. But before Inspector Cold Logic could complete his regulatory documentation, something unexpected happened. Thomas's, the elderly vegan who had been rediscovering food memories through Tony's cooking, approached the inspector with a dignified expression of cultural concern. Inspector Cold Logic, may I address the regulatory concerns regarding Human Tony's food preparation methods? Citizen Thomas's regulatory compliance is not subject to community input. Inspector, I am 147 years old. I remember when our species prepared food with care, when meals were shared with family, when cooking was an expression of cultural identity rather than efficient nutrition delivery. Inspector Cold Logic consulted his tablet. Citizen Thomas's historical dietary practices were inefficient and emotionally irregular. Current nutritional protocols represent advanced evolutionary development. Inspector, Human Tony has helped our community remember that food is more than fuel. It is culture, memory, tradition, and connection between individuals. This is not addiction. It is rediscovering our cultural heritage. Over the next hour, something remarkable happened. Aliens throughout the transit station began arriving at Tony's diner, not just to eat, but to support the idea that food could be culturally meaningful rather than just nutritionally efficient. Dr. Nova Starweaver, the station nutritionist, addressed Inspector Cold Logic with scientific data that surprised everyone. Inspector, I have been monitoring the health indicators of consumers who regularly eat at Human Tony's establishment. Rather than showing signs of dietary dependency, they demonstrate improved social bonding, enhanced cultural awareness, and increased community engagement. Dr. Starweaver, emotional responses to food consumption are classified as regulatory violations regardless of secondary social benefits. Inspector, what if the emotional responses are not dietary addiction, but cultural rediscovery? What if human Tony's cooking methods are helping our communities remember valuable traditions that nutritional efficiency protocols inadvertently eliminated? Delano, the station manager, stepped forward with administrative data that further complicated Inspector Cold Logic's regulatory assessment. Inspector Cold Logic, since Human Tony's restaurant became popular, we have documented significant improvements in station community cohesion. Families spend more time together, different species interact more frequently, and social conflicts have decreased by 23%. Station Manager Villano, social benefits do not override dietary safety regulations, but the most powerful testimony came from the aliens themselves. One by one, members of different species shared how Tony's cooking had helped them reconnect with cultural memories, family traditions, and community values that had been lost in the pursuit of nutritional efficiency. Corvin spoke for his Arcturian community. Inspector, Human Tony taught us that food preparation can be an expression of care for others. When we cook with attention to flavor and enjoyment, we are showing love for our families in ways that nutrition paste cannot provide. Zara, Corvin's young daughter, added, Inspector Cold Logic, Tony's food makes me want to spend time with my family, to learn about our old traditions, to share meals instead of consuming nutrition efficiently alone. Even species that Tony had never served joined the discussion, arguing that the concept of food that creates happiness represented cultural value that transcended regulatory concerns. Inspector, said Rex, a normally solitary Plutonian, I have lived for 89 years eating optimal nutrition alone. Human Tony's restaurant taught me that sharing food with others creates connections that individual efficiency cannot provide. Inspector Cold Logic found himself facing not a regulatory violation, but a community cultural movement centered around the idea that food could serve purposes beyond mere nutritional delivery. Citizens, I understand your testimonies, but galactic dietary regulations exist to prevent harmful consumption behaviors. Excessive enjoyment of food creates potential for abuse. Tony, who had been listening to his customers defend his cooking with growing emotion, stepped forward to address Inspector Cold Logic directly. Inspector, my family has been cooking for 4 generations. We fed people through good times and bad, helped families celebrate important moments, provided comfort during difficult periods. Food isn't just about nutrition. It's about bringing people together, creating memories, showing care for others. Human Tony, personal traditions do not override galactic safety standards. Inspector, look around this room. Do you see addiction? Or do you see community? Do you see dietary dependency? Or do you see families spending time together? Different species learning about each other's cultures, people rediscovering traditions that made their lives richer. Inspector Cold Logic looked around the packed diner where aliens were sharing meals, discussing cultural memories, and demonstrating social connections that clearly transcended mere food consumption. After 3 hours of testimony from community members, health data analysis, and cultural documentation, Inspector Cold Logic faced a regulatory dilemma that his training had not prepared him to resolve. Human Tony, he said slowly, your cooking methods clearly violate established nutritional efficiency protocols. However, the community testimony suggests that these violations may serve beneficial cultural purposes that standard regulations do not address. So what happens now, Inspector? I am prepared to offer a compromise solution. Your establishment may continue operating under experimental cultural preservation protocols, provided that you implement educational components that help consumers understand the cultural significance of flavor-enhanced food preparation. Tony looked around his diner full of aliens who had rediscovered the joy of eating food that tasted good, thinking about the implications of Inspector Cold Logic's offer. What kind of educational components? You would be required to teach cooking, classes that demonstrate the cultural and social benefits of traditional food preparation methods. Consumers would learn not only to enjoy flavorful food, but to understand its role in cultural preservation and community building. Galena stepped forward with administrative enthusiasm. Inspector, the station could establish a cultural food education center with human Tony serving as primary instructor for traditional cooking methods. The educational component would satisfy regulatory requirements while preserving the community benefits that have been documented. Inspector Cold Logic agreed. Human Tony would become an official cultural food preservation specialist. Tony considered the offer, realizing that he was being asked to do something he'd never imagined: teach aliens throughout the galaxy how to cook food that actually tasted good. Inspector, would I still be able to run my restaurant? The restaurant would become a working laboratory for cultural food education, serving meals that demonstrate proper traditional cooking techniques while providing community gathering space for cultural preservation activities. And aliens from other stations could come learn how to cook real food. The program could potentially expand throughout this sector, with trained cultural food preservation specialists teaching traditional cooking methods on multiple stations and worlds. Tony looked around his diner, where aliens were already forming cooking discussion groups, sharing cultural food memories, and planning family meals using techniques they'd learned from eating his food. Inspector, I accept your compromise, but I want to make sure everyone understands the most important thing about good cooking, which is, it's not about complicated techniques or expensive ingredients. It's about putting care and attention into food you're preparing for people you care about. Anyone can learn to cook food that brings families together and makes people happy. 6 months after Inspector Cold Logic's compromise ruling, Tony's Cosmic Diner had been transformed into the Galactic Center for Cultural Food Education, with Tony serving as head instructor for what had become the most popular program at the transit station. All right, everyone. Tony called to his current class of 37 aliens, representing 14 different species. Today, we're learning to make bread, real bread, with yeast and thyme, and the kind of care that makes food worth sharing. The classroom kitchen was filled with aliens wearing aprons, kneading dough, and discovering that food preparation could be meditative, social, and deeply satisfying in ways that nutrition paste dispensers could never provide. Corvin, who had become Tony's assistant instructor, helped a group of Centaurian students understand the concept of letting dough rise. The waiting is part of the process, Corvin explained, having learned this patience from Tony. Good bread cannot be rushed. Like good relationships, it requires time and attention to develop properly. In the corner, Zara taught a group of young aliens from various species how to measure ingredients, explaining that cooking was both science and art, requiring precision and creativity in equal measure. Human Tony taught us that recipes are guidelines, not rules, Zara said, demonstrating how to adjust seasoning by taste rather than strict measurement. You learn to cook by paying attention to what the food needs. Tony moved through the classroom, helping students understand concepts that went far beyond mere food preparation. He was teaching patience, cultural appreciation, family connection, and the idea that taking care of others through food was one of the most fundamental expressions of community. Mrs. Velana called Thomas's from his cooking station. This bread-making process is helping me remember food traditions from my childhood. My grandmother used to say that bread shared with others is never just bread, it is an invitation to friendship. Velana, who had enrolled in Tony's program to better understand the cultural phenomenon happening at her station, found herself rediscovering Centaurian cooking traditions that her species had abandoned generations ago. Thomas's Human Tony has helped many of us reconnect with cultural memories that we thought were lost to nutritional efficiency protocols. The success of Tony's program had attracted attention throughout the galactic sector. Station managers, cultural preservation societies, and even nutritional scientists were requesting consultation on implementing similar programs at their facilities. Tony, Dr. Nova Starweaver announced during the afternoon class session, I have received communications from 17 different stations requesting cultural food education programs. The Galactic Council wants to discuss expanding your teaching methodology throughout multiple sectors. Tony paused in his demonstration of pasta-making technique to consider what Dr. Starweaver was telling him. Doc, that sounds like a lot more than just running a cooking school. Tony, your program has demonstrated that cultural food education produces benefits beyond nutrition, improved family bonding, enhanced cultural awareness, stronger community connections, and increased interspecies understanding. So they want me to teach cooking to the whole galaxy? They want you to develop a standardized curriculum for cultural food preservation education that could be implemented across galactic civilization. Tony looked around his classroom, where aliens were kneading bread, sharing cultural food memories, and learning that preparing food with care was a way of expressing love for family and community. Doc, I'm honored, but the most important thing about good cooking is that it's personal. Every family, every culture, every community has their own food traditions. I can teach techniques and principles, but the real cooking has to come from each community rediscovering their own heritage. What would you recommend for program expansion? Train local instructors from each species to teach their own cultural food traditions. I can provide the basic principles: use fresh ingredients, season to taste, cook with care, share meals with people you love. But each community needs to rediscover their own food heritage. 2 years after Tony Ritchie first served spaghetti and meatballs to a curious Arcturian family, the cultural food education movement had spread throughout 17 galactic sectors. With over 300 certified cultural food preservation specialists teaching traditional cooking methods to communities that had forgotten the joy of eating food that actually tasted good. Tony maintained his home base at the Galactic Transit Hub, but traveled regularly to consultation assignments, helping communities rediscover their food heritage and establish their own cultural cooking programs. Tony, Nalana announced during their monthly program review, the Galactic Council has officially adopted cultural food education as a standard component of community development initiatives. Your teaching methodology is now being implemented on over 2,000 worlds. Tony looked around his expanded facility, where the original diner still operated alongside multiple classroom kitchens, cultural food research laboratories, and community gathering spaces where families came to share meals prepared with traditional methods. Well, the most important thing is that families are cooking together again, sharing meals, passing down food traditions to their kids. That's what makes it worthwhile. Through the windows, Tony could see aliens throughout the transit station, carrying home-cooked meals, gathering in family groups for shared dinners, and teaching their children cooking techniques that had been nearly lost to nutritional efficiency protocols. Corvin approached with his weekly report on program expansion. Human Tony, we have received requests from species throughout the Outer Rim territories. They have heard about communities rediscovering food traditions and wish to learn cultural food education methods. Corvin, what do you think is the most important thing we've accomplished here? Human Tony, we have helped families remember that preparing food with care is a way of showing love, that sharing meals creates connections between generations, and that every species has valuable food heritage worth preserving. And the most important lesson for new instructors? That good cooking cannot be rushed or reduced to efficiency protocols. Like good relationships, it requires patience, attention, and genuine care for the people you are feeding. Tony smiled, thinking about his great-grandfather who had opened the first Ricci's restaurant in Brooklyn, his grandfather who had expanded the business, and his father who had kept the family tradition alive through decades of changing times, had become the Ritchie who brought family cooking traditions to the galaxy. As aliens throughout the transit station gathered for evening meals prepared with traditional methods, sharing food that had been cooked with care and seasoned with cultural memory, Tony reflected on the simple truth that had started it all. Food isn't just fuel, it's culture, family, tradition, and the most basic way of showing that you care about the people around you. Some lessons are universal, even across the galaxy.